now tuning into Base Wave.
"75 people arrested, 5 unconscious, and around 20 people injured." According to different media outlets, these numbers are the outcome of the Pro-Palestine protest last week, on May the 6th in front of the Wijnhaven campus, The Hague. Last Tuesday, more than 100 people came together to peacefully protest the ongoing genocide in Palestine. The protest was peaceful, but then it turned violent. Even a week later, students and staff are still shocked. How could this happen? Was the violence necessary? And what was the protest even about?
We are Filip and Emilie, and today we have a closer look at the pro-Palestine protest and its consequences.
Today, we speak to students who were stuck in the protest for several hours and experienced police violence. We have a closer look at the connections of Leiden University with Israel, we dig into Dutch law, we look at the university's reaction statement, and we invited student activists to give us the bigger picture about the protests.
Before we start, let's give you a quick overview of what is happening in Palestine. After the October 7th attack by Hamas and other Palestinian militant groups in 2023, Israel began an intensive bombing campaign of Gaza. Then, 20 days after the attack, they launched a ground invasion into the territory. Since then, international estimates agree over 50,000 Palestinian civilians have been killed, an estimated 1.9 million people, or 90% of all Gazans, have been displaced. Roughly 70% of all structures in Gaza have been leveled, predominantly at the hands of the Israeli Defense Forces. The Gaza Strip remains largely inaccessible to humanitarian aid due to an imposed blockade. According to some experts, Israel maintains the blockade as a targeted starvation campaign against the population. Israeli officials have stated that they intend to occupy and demilitarize all of Gaza. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu on the charges of using starvation as a method of war and the murder of civilians.
The protest last Tuesday was held to bring attention to the ongoing conflict. But how did it escalate? For that, we spoke to 3 participating students and constructed a timeline of the event. It all started in the Wijnhaven building at 1 o'clock.
I was on the second floor when people started chanting on the main stairs. I joined them because I support the cause.
There were banners and posters, but we sat peacefully, quietly. We started chanting some things and essentially just tried to get people to join in.
What happened is that there were some chants and then people started leaving, like there was a walkout.
And so we all got into an orderly line and we were in like a very single file. No one was being excessively loud or pushy or anything. And we started going down the Spanish steps towards the door. But university closed and locked those doors and wouldn't let anybody in or out anymore for, I don't know, maybe like 10 minutes or something. And then finally they did open the doors and let people out by the side exit. And when we got outside, there were already a bunch of police people there. A couple of police motorcycles, I think, as well. But yeah, it was still very, very peaceful. Nothing was happening. The police was there, and the number of police started to steadily increase.
I got there by accident. I was curious. I was told that there was a protest, and I could see the cop cars, and I even saw from above a police chopper. So I was very curious on what was going on, and I saw a friend of mine at the protest, so I decided to join. All I saw were the cops that were blocking off the entrance to the university. And it was super peaceful. It was just, regular students.
And yes, the first violence act that I witnessed was basically the effort with the police to place themselves in a straight line between the facade of the uni and the mass of people that were protesting. So in doing so, they started pulling and pushing people that were standing in front of the main entrance, and that's like the police started hitting the people in the front lines. So that's what I actually witnessed.
Yeah, and then it kind of got worse and worse. We at some point decided to go up the street toward the center and towards Spar. But as soon as the group started walking, the police kind of ran in front of us and built a line that nobody could cross, so nobody could go further into the center. And then they also built a line on the other edge of the group so that essentially nobody could move anymore, nobody could leave the group, nobody could go anywhere.
When we started moving and we got locked in by the police, that's when we stayed completely peaceful, but the police continued to be extremely violent.
But then the police basically forced people that were protesting to stay encircled.
The cops stopped us and I was like, can we leave? He said no. I said, why? And then he said, we're planning on arresting you. And it's at that point where I think all the students kind of realized, like, fuck, something might actually, like, go really bad down here.
There were people from the outside joining the protest or chanting, supporting the protesters, and they were actually thrown inside of the circle by the police.
And the organizers started passing around markers so that we could write Laura's numbers on our arms in case anything happened. And in general, after they started blocking us off with not just themselves, with their cop cars, so we couldn't see what was happening on the other side.
I was in the front, and on the back I know that they were pushing. I think they arrested some people in that group. And then I lost contact with the other group that was on the other side of the vehicles.
Also, while we were stuck in that circle, because I'm pretty sure it lasted about an hour and a half, multiple people started having extreme panic attacks, because I also think that they were there for a lot longer than I was. And this one girl right next to me tried to talk to a police officer to get out. He didn't let her. And she came back to me and started having an extreme panic attack, fell to the ground and was going in and out of consciousness. We tried to get her to eat something, drink some water, but it wasn't really working, and the cops were just staring at her. They weren't moving a muscle, no EMTs, nothing, and the organizers finally took her to, I think, some type of safer place. I think got her some help, but I don't really know what happened to her after that.
They kept everyone there for, I think it was maybe 2 hours or something, and they wouldn't let anyone leave. And finally, they decided, the police, they gave like an announcement in Dutch, only in Dutch, saying that we had to move now, all of us, and go to Central Station quick. And if we didn't move quickly and behave, they would start using violence. And at this point, several people had been beaten, several people were unconscious. So we all, those of us who understood Dutch, because a lot of us didn't speak Dutch and they didn't bother to say it in English, but we, started moving towards Central Station. And when we crossed the river, somebody also got beaten.
I was very scared because it's not the first protest that I witnessed, but this was particularly violent. Like, the response by the police was particularly violent.
It wasn't my first protest, no. I've been to Pro-Palestine, environmental, anything, really, lots of things. But it was by far the most violent one that I've ever been at, from the side of the police. And it was the one with the most unjustified force, I would say, and the least explanation by the police, by the uni, in newspapers. It just hasn't been properly addressed by anyone.
On the protesters' part, definitely much more peaceful than other protests I've been to, but it is some of the most violence I've seen from cops, especially since, the past protests I've been to, there were often some people going on, side quests trying to destroy some stuff. And so at that point, cops would get involved and start to be violent. But here, the students weren't doing anything to cause this type of violence from the police officers. So it was shocking. And
I'm glad that the protesters, the students, didn't respond in any violent way to what was happening, because the police was absolutely not professional in the way they managed the whole thing. They were provoking. I don't think it was a professional response from the police force.
I feel like the university has always been so silent on this subject and just always kind of trying to hide behind the police. And there's no valid reason for the students to get beaten up, but in general, they weren't destroying anything. They were just peacefully protesting. It was a sit-in, and it was just insane.
I think that a university that has existed for this long and that prides itself on its liberal values and whatnot should understand the concept of genocide and should equally understand that it's bad to support that. And I just wish For one, that, the tuition fees that are not cheap, as we all know, were going to something other than ethnic cleansing. I just wish that they at least, had the backbone to stand up and say, yeah, we made a mistake, we allowed this to happen, we are knowingly financing the genocide of Palestinians, and we are going to put a stop to it.
But what did Leiden University actually say about all of this? We will present you parts of the statement which the executive board published a day after the protest. This part talks about the necessity of police presence.
The police arrived at the scene early because the Wijnhaven protest began with an unscheduled demonstration in the street. The university's Wijnhaven building is in an area where many government agencies are located, and the police there are extra alert to demonstrations for which prior notice has not been provided. Some group members wore face coverings and cut off access to and barricaded doors and emergency exits at Wijnhaven. This was not only against our house rules, but also posed a potential risk to the safety of the many students and staff still in the building. Their safety could no longer be guaranteed. In accordance with our house rules, the university asked everyone present to leave the building. This went calmly, and everyone was able to leave the building independently and of their own accord. This also applies to the majority of demonstrators who were in the building. The small group of occupiers who refused to do so were asked multiple times to leave Wijnhaven. They were then ordered to leave, also standard procedure, after which the university had no choice but to hand over control of the building to the police.
And this is the general reaction of the university towards the protests.
The executive board cannot condone the way the demonstrators try to draw attention to the situation in the Middle East. This caused damage to the building, and the teaching and other activities had to be cancelled for a day. The executive board is also shocked by the confrontations in the street between some of the demonstrators and the police. The police detained several demonstrators on suspicion of vandalism. Demonstrations are always permitted within our university community, but our house rules must be followed to ensure demonstrations proceed in a safe and orderly fashion.
As a consequence, the university announces intensified LU card checks. Additionally, the statement mentions the work of a university committee, which is currently looking into Leiden's collaborations with Israel. What the response omits is any mention of police violence against students. After the crowd was dispersed, however, both Beehive and Wijnhaven remained locked down and could not be accessed by students. Most students were allowed to retrieve some of their personal belongings. However, the bags of students on the third floor were withheld for several days after the protest, even after Wijnhaven reopened. The university has not elaborated on why. We will now dive a bit deeper into how the university dealt with the demonstration, but we will also talk about police violence and securitization on campus. Therefore, we invited two student activists from our university.
First of all, thank you for having both of us to talk about this.
Yes, thank you.
Much appreciated. On Tuesday, students liberated the campus here at Wijnhaven to reiterate their demands that they've been saying for years and years, which is to implement an immediate academic boycott of Israeli institutions and complicit companies. And this escalation comes after years of being ignored, of negotiations being silenced, of teach-ins being repressed, of students being beaten. And so the move to occupy a university building doesn't come out of nowhere, but comes out of a long, long time of being ignored. And the events began with a teach-in inside, where students and staff were all invited to come join on the stairs to call together for an academic boycott. And as soon as that began at 1 p.m., the doors of Wijnhaven were closed, and nobody was allowed in, which was an immediate and very clear escalation on the part of the security guards. There was also already immediately 2 police vans outside. And so I think it was very clear from the start for a lot of students and staff inside that this wasn't going to be a protest like we've seen on campus before, but this was going to be a lot more of an intense situation than we were really anticipating.
You mentioned previous protests. Mm-hmm. How did the campus normally react on them?
Well, for one, they didn't already barricade students inside. Maybe you can speak about
I think protests. That there's always been a strained relationship with securitization, and I would I can confidently say there's never been an appropriate or normal police response from any student activists on campus. I mean, we're talking about a context where almost exactly a year ago, riot police stormed the Wijnhaven building to try to get occupants from the third floors when we had the same demands that there were last year. However, what's very interesting to see there is that when you then look at the framing of the statements that the university makes in the aftermath, which they've done again now, they said that the student activists voluntarily left, which was not true. They did not voluntarily leave. They were chased out by riot police. And yeah, I think that that upscaling of security from last year speaks to what happened this year, for sure.
Yeah, I was wondering, I didn't really get it. There were like kind of two protests, is that right? There was like the one at the stairs that moved out, there was the one that we followed as the radio, but there was like a second one in third floor. Can you tell me something about that?
Yeah, so the second one in the third floor was the occupation of the building, and the protest outside was the support demonstration for the students who had decided to occupy the building to demand an academic boycott.
Yeah, maybe you can tell us a bit like how both protests continued. I mean, the one we reported a bit about, but like the third floor, we did not really have much knowledge about it.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to the experiences of the students inside, considering I wasn't there. But as far as I'm aware, it happened very similarly to last year, where riot police stormed the building and essentially forced these students to leave. But what was very different from last year is that last year there were active negotiations between the university and the student occupiers, which is the point of an occupation. The point of an occupation is not to occupy a building for fun, but is to force a negotiation that the university otherwise entirely avoids. But what happened this year is that the university did not engage in negotiations, and instead riot cops were sent in much sooner to immediately try to force the students out of the building, which was also another chain of escalations that occurred throughout the day. And so, yeah, the point of having an occupation of the occupation in that sense was entirely wiped away by the university, which is a reflection of their constant refusal to engage in any kind of discussion or dialogue, and I think leaves student activists and students generally here feeling a bit left behind, ignored, and lost, and at a loss for how they can make their voices heard at the university.
Yeah, and to add on to that, because I think what you said was very poignant, just to give listeners perhaps really the broader context of what we're talking about here. When we say there was a negotiation phase last year, that negotiation phase of breaking procurement ties and academic ties came after almost 3 years of tirelessly fighting to even get to the negotiation phase, after which there was a promise made of an ad hoc committee which would investigate human rights abuses in their ties. There was no transparency in the timeline of this committee. There was no transparency as to the people who would sit on this committee. And I think that it really speaks to the frustration of students that there's no transparency in either of these places. So I think that it's important to emphasize how much and how many stages there are before students decide to occupy a building. It's a last resort, and it's a last resort that is needed to make when there's an ongoing genocide.
Yeah, you were talking about this committee. Maybe you can tell us a bit more. I just read in the statement, they mentioned it again, that like this committee is picking up the work.
Well, I wish I could tell you more about that. Unfortunately, yeah, like I said, I and any other student around us, or as far as I know, has virtually no information on this committee, on what they do, what their findings are. But again, students and staff alike spent many months creating a report which is publicly available online that very clearly outlines all the ties and why they're harmful. And then in particular, the ones that come to mind are the exchange ties with Tel Aviv University and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, which are complicit in the settler colonial occupation of Palestine, and which are complicit in military programs which train students to use combat tactics on Palestinians.
Okay, we're gonna pause here for some brief context. Much of the information presented here comes from a report entitled Mapping Leiden University's Ties to Israel, Ending Complicity with Apartheid, Occupation, and Genocide. This report was published in May 2024 and provides a detailed overview of the publicly available ties Leiden University has to Israel, and also criticizes how Leiden University fails to be transparent in those ties. We recommend anyone wanting to do more research to look up the report itself, as not all of its points will be mentioned here. According to that report, Leiden University has in the past maintained ties to mainly two Israeli universities, Tel Aviv University and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Firstly, this partnership was used for exchange programs between Israel and the Netherlands. These exchanges, according to Leiden University's official website, have, as of May 2024, come under investigation by that committee, and have temporarily been halted. Neither Tel Aviv University nor the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, as of the writing of the script, name Leiden University in their lists of possible exchange programs that we could find. The report continues. Leiden University, as of 2024, has openly admitted to collaborating with several other Israeli universities on research projects through the EU Horizons framework. These research and assessment projects range from research into AI learning, counterterrorism in the EU, stem cell gene therapy, cancer research, and sustainability projects. Finally, the report concludes, Leiden University has invested in companies which either directly or indirectly collaborate and operate with Israeli institutions or the IDF. For example, many of the named Israeli companies test and dispose of products in what is internationally recognized as occupied territory. Others increasingly collaborate with the Israeli Defense Forces on military drone procurement, and others still produce technology used to monitor border crossings and for registration in settlements.
We're talking about very precise things here that directly contribute to the genocide. The fact that there would be a need for an ad hoc committee after all this research has been conducted is a little bit unsettling to us as student activists, and also I think to people in general who see this and think, how is the university board not reckoning with it?
I want to go even more in on the committee, because the information that we do have is that a few weeks back in the University Council there was the news that the committee to create the ad hoc committee had finished its work. So what has been happening since last year's occupation, which was when the university announced this so-called committee, they've, for the past nearly a year, they've just been working on creating a committee. And this committee, this new ethics committee that is supposed to evaluate these ties, the executive board, the CVB of our university, has not committed to actually following their advice. So it is very clear, even from the little public information that's available, that this ethics committee is nothing more than a stalling tactic. I think the fact that there's been no action, no public information, no commitment to following the advice in the entire last year is really, really telling of that.
But at least from last protest on, they kind of created, quote-unquote, this committee. So do you think there will be actions from the university after this protest?
I wish I could say that I did. However, and I think you already alluded to this as well, with the fact of the negotiations not happening at all, even though the negotiations were very performative last year, and the statement that they released this year, I think really shows that the university's executive board is very much just digging its heels in and refusing to engage with this conversation. I think this CVB is really, really hoping that it can wait for this movement to blow over. I think that it thinks it could delay its way out of this.
I completely agree. I think you hit the nail on the head with that. I mean, that is one of the darker aspects of this, is that they think that, in my opinion, they think that if they turn their head away from the genocide for long enough that it'll just blow over, and that it's just like a trend of a movement that will happen and that people will forget. And to that, it's so important that for new students and old students alike, that we continue to educate people on these ties, what they are, but also how the university has responded to it. These are all things that new incoming students should know about. Even issues of, hey, there wasn't always LU security card checks at Wijnhaven. That didn't used to be that way. Yeah, that's just kind of the knowledge sharing process that's important to these kinds of things.
Yeah, I want to, following up on the knowledge sharing, the Students for Palestine in the past few months has been holding teach-ins across the university to talk exactly about the ties that you were just referring to, of which there are many more than just those two exchange ties, unfortunately. And to talk about why those ties really matter, because I think it can be very easy, if you don't realize this, to fall into the trap of thinking that these are just academic collaborations, and therefore there can't be anything morally wrong about them. But the truth of the matter is that by having these academic collaborations with Israeli institutions, the university is, one, extending material support that supports the occupation and genocide in Palestine, but it also extends this political support, this like thumbs up, we think this is great, we think Israel is engaging in a very valid form of statehood right now, that this genocide is valid, that everything is going okay. And so these are not just academic collaborations, this is a complicity in genocide, and it is an explicit support of Israel's ethnic cleansing, because it is ethnic cleansing. And so when the Students for Palestine, when students were organizing these teach-ins across campus, they repeatedly experienced repression from security guards. They were called in for meetings by their faculty supervisors, they were carted, they were pushed around, they were harassed. And I think that's really very telling of the fact that the university does not only want to wait for this movement to blow over, does not only want to scare off its students by calling riot cops on them, but it also doesn't even want students to know. And that's really, really dark, I think, at a university. Because if you're going to silence this critical thought and silence really important information for the sake of protecting your own political power and your own position, that's the entire basis of a university, and like a free exchange of ideas, and to have a place where these critical ideas can be held. And I think that's really, really concerning.
Talking about the university, you talked about like repression in the past. Would you say this was just the cherry on top, like the protest and like the reaction of the university, or like how did you experience it?
I think this was beyond something we had imagined, what happened on Tuesday.
For sure.
And I think a lot of students experienced it in the same way, and I'm really, really sorry to of all of the students who experienced this extreme violence, just walking out of their university campus from a sit-in to be met very quickly with riot batons. They brought out dogs. They brought out police dogs, which are an incredibly dangerous and sometimes lethal form of police violence, at a protest that was not even 300 students. It was students and staff protesting in front of Leiden University, having come out of their university building, and they brought out batons and police dogs. They beat 5 students unconscious. They injured at least 20 others, and that's just including the people that the medics could access, because the police also prevented medics from accessing these students at times. And people were also sent to the hospital. So this is not something that I've seen before. I know this is not something that a lot of other students who were there on Tuesdays have seen before. And it was really jarring to see, and I really hope it doesn't become the new normal, but what we've been seeing in Amsterdam and what we saw in Nijmegen recently too, where a student got bit terribly by a police dog, I think this is becoming a new normal.
Yeah, I think that's a really dark reality that we have to reckon with. And also the fact that, again, to come back to this statement, because it was just so jarring and upsetting in so many ways, that the university talks about how the protest broke its house rules, and that was a justification for calling the police. However, realistically, the protest would not have been allowed if it was announced beforehand. We know this because there's been a history of anything Palestine related being cancelled on the university campus. And that therefore that's just not a justification to say that protests like this aren't allowed to happen. I mean, we're talking about a right that is enshrined in the Dutch constitution, which is your right to demonstrate in public institutions, which Leiden University is. And I think that's something important to remember, because not just in university settings, but taking it a little bit broader, protests for Palestine are kind of challenging the way we view democracy and our right to protest. I mean, it's our right in a supposed democracy, and if given that our protests are happening peacefully, we should have the right to do that safely. And the last people who should be putting us in danger is the university.
But how could the protest could have looked like in a perfect case?
Yeah, well, actually, the police's job in showing up to a demonstration under Dutch law and what's supposed to happen is that the police is there to facilitate a demonstration, regardless of whether it has been announced beforehand or there's no asking for permission for a demonstration on public land. So the police's role there is to facilitate. For example, if a protest wants to walk, they need to make sure, can this street be blocked? Do we need to wait? Things like this, making sure that the protesters are safe and that there's a good interaction between the bystanders and the protest.
And that there aren't like bad faith actors, for
Exactly.
example. Yeah.
They are not supposed to do anything to restrict the protest until the mayor announces these restrictions. And the mayor only has very specific requirements under which they can announce these restrictions related to health and safety. But mayors across the country have been using these guidelines a lot more loosely recently. So ideally, the police would have been there to facilitate the protest. For example, make sure that people weren't walking over the tram line when a tram was coming. For example, to make sure that the protest was going smoothly.
Let's give you a little wrap-up of the Dutch law and its official instructions regarding demonstrations.
In the Manifesto of Demonstration, Article 1 states that everyone has the right to assemble and demonstrate in public spaces. This right can be restricted for 3 specific reasons: to protect public health, to ensure traffic safety, and to prevent or stop disorder. The message of the demonstrators has no impact on the limitations. In order for a demonstration to go through, the organizers must notify the city in advance. This would enable the city council to issue rules on when and how it would take place. However, they cannot ask about the content of the demonstration's message. Only the mayor can oppose or end a demonstration due to a late or incomplete notification or to protect health, traffic, or public order.
In the case of the protest at Wijnhaven, the demonstration was not announced. If during a protest the demonstrating bans, instructions, or restrictions are violated, both the participants and the organizers can face 2 months of imprisonment or a fine.
As we have seen, the police caused great distress during the protest. The officers who were present at the demonstration are called the MIs, or the mobile units. They are regular police officers who can be called upon to act in groups. Their goal is to prevent or combat disruption or public order. They are usually present from the beginning of such events in order to guide the big group of people. The MIs, as well as special units, are allowed to use force to restore public order.
By law, the MIs can use violence under strict requirements. The violence must be proportionate, moderate, and reasonable. They can consider using the water cannon, strictly and only under the instructions of the mayor. The police is also entitled to ask for proof of identity for detection and/or security reasons. Force from the police can only be used if there are no other options. The officers must decide quickly whether the use of a baton or a firearm is necessary or if talking is sufficient. Indeed, the police officers are the ones deciding whether force can and may be used. They cannot use more force than is necessary, and they must precede it with a strong warning. So in other words, the police is allowed to use violence, but it is up to them how much to use.
Ideally, the university would have spoken to its own students on Tuesday as well, instead of ignoring and immediately calling riot police.
Exactly, like to touch on what we were talking about earlier, this negotiation phase. That was the goal of this, some kind of reckoning of a person who has the power to speak on that, whether it be a spokesperson or, God forbid, someone from the executive board coming to talk to us and say, hey, here's a negotiating step we can do. That would have been a positive step in the direction of so many students who would like to see an end to these ties.
There was no one.
There was no one.
There was riot batons. There were police dogs. There was a police helicopter. I don't even know how many police officers were there, but I think it felt close to the number of protesters that were there at some point.
Yeah.
Quite some people also get arrested. Could you tell us maybe why did they get arrested and like what happened to them afterwards?
Absolutely. So the arrest was also, I mean, there were multiple illegal things that happened yesterday on behalf of the police. One is that they were immediately applying restrictions on the protest, which they did not have the authority to do yet because the mayor had not issued any abolishment of the protest at that point. They were also hitting people over the head very aggressively, knocking multiple people out, which they are not allowed to do by their own rules. They also arrested people without warning, and they snatched random people from the crowds, people who were bystanders, for no apparent reason. They snatched people as they were dispersing from the protest. So the arrest total racked up really fast because the police were just basically going anywhere and grabbing someone that they could and not giving warnings, not giving reasons. They arrested somebody, quote-unquote, for doxing one of the newspapers, and we're almost positive that this is because they were recording the police, which you are fully within your right to do. So there were a lot of arrests. As far as we are aware, none of these charges are holding, and so it was disturbing to see on a lot of news channels that they were leading with these 75 arrests, however many arrests they counted, which implies that the protesters there were criminal. But what the case is that the protesters there were not doing anything that warranted arrest like that. But the police's actions were incredibly out of line.
Yeah, and there's a difference between being taken in by the police and being arrested. And I think that's what, unfortunately, a lot of the media mixes up in cases like these. Like you said, there has to be a crime for there to be grounds for arrest. And being a peaceful protester is not enough grounds for that arrest. And police are well aware of that. So their tactic, it appears, is to create absolute chaos, violently beat people, coming with them, taking them in, taking them out of the scene. And once they have them, to just be like, oh yeah, we can't arrest you now, so I guess you can just go.
So to clarify, they were just taken in, not arrested.
For what I can speak to and what I've heard, the majority of people who were taken in were not arrested and there were no criminal charges.
I was at the police station as people were being released. So they were taken in, processed. We found out charges were dropped. And then they were released. And people came out covered in bruises. They came out, still somebody had a bleeding wound from their head. They had been one of the people who were knocked unconscious. People came out needing immediately a sling on their arm. And despite all of this, they were incredibly cheerful, which was really good to see. But also, it was really sad that all of these people had been absolutely brutalized by the police, like across from here, right in front of the university. And that the university's statement the next day doesn't include any of this. It talks about property damage, which there wasn't.
The stickers on the glass doors.
Yes. Which doesn't even compare to the amount of damage that they inflicted on their own students. I mean, we've referenced the statement multiple times, but you should really read it because it's disgusting. I don't know, depressing to see the university statement about vandalism when that and to not mention our demands. Practically. Like they mentioned a situation in the Middle East, and they mentioned that the actions yesterday do not justify bringing attention to the Middle East. They can't even bring themselves to talk about what happened in Palestine, what's happening in Palestine for 77 years, for 18 months.
Yeah.
They can't mention it.
No.
And they can't mention the violence that they inflicted on their own students. It's such a sanitized and exclusive statement.
Yeah, and also just because I want to debunk one other point from their statement.
Please.
The point on face coverings. I just want to highlight the fact that over the last year and more, students have been specifically targeted by the university for actions regarding their activism against the university. It's not strange, therefore, that people want to protect their identity in doing these kinds of things, and still be able to resist against this structure. So I think that if the university doesn't want people to wear face coverings, then they should, act with more good faith towards their students. You can see more information about this on Open Leiden, who is a very good source on talking about these issues. I'm talking about emails being looked into, students specifically having their bags searched, randomly being targeted. The list goes on.
Yeah. Protesting with a mask on, protesting anonymous is protected under Dutch law.
Yes.
That is something that you are allowed to do. And also on this, what I find really ironic about the updates that the university posted on Tuesday is that they announced increased LU card checks and heightened security on Wednesday in order to ensure the safety of students, which is ironic for two reasons. One, the people who were present on Tuesday were students and staff of Leiden University. So this is nothing more than an empty threat, but it is a way to impose this fear that you're referring to of being targeted by the university, that the security guards are looking for you. And the second thing I was thinking of was the fact that they repeatedly used the term of keeping the campus safe, of keeping students safe. But what we saw on Tuesday was a total disregard for student staff well-being.
Yeah.
We would like to thank you for your attention. We would also like to thank Annika, Flavia, and Vicky for contributing to the writing and research of this episode. And we would like to thank our anonymous interviewees for their contribution and for sharing their experiences.
If you feel starved for more Basewave content, join my co-host and I next week and listen to our interview with Hans Wilbrink, lecturer of the Eurasia region. To round out the semester, we'll discuss the two most controversial topics of this year, the viewing of a Russian film at university and the university's increasing securitization of Leiden's Hague campuses. Until next time.
And good luck on finals!